How does one turn a simple idea into one of the largest phenomena in its entire industry? How does one take a bunch of cartoony characters made for kids and create a game that most developers would kill to be a part of? Well, this may be how it ended up, but it's certainly not how it started. In fact, if things had gone slightly differently, none of this would have happened at all. On April 27, 1992, 22-year-old video game designer Masahiro Sakurai released his first game, Kirby's Dream Land. And luckily for him, it was a massive success. And after designing a few more Kirby games, Sakurai had cemented himself as one of the favorites for Nintendo. But it was time for HAL Laboratories to come up with a new game. Sakurai had plans for both an adventure game and a fighting game, so he started work right away on the adventure game. But right about that time, another game that Sakurai was working on, which he called Kirby's Air Ride, was cancelled. So HAL needed to rush a game out and make something quickly. So alongside his friend and programmer Satoru Iwata, he made a game that would come to look like this. Dragon King the Fighting Game. A game that uses percentage instead of health bars. A game with lots of jumping and platforms. But also with faceless human figures? This, of course, was never released. But it laid the groundwork for something special. You see, this game was different from any other game at the time. Most fighting games look like this. Two characters on opposite sides of the screen, lowering each other's health bar by using combos and complex button inputs. Sakurai saw these games and noticed that they were not very inclined towards younger audiences. Many had intense violence and gore, and inputs that would be hard to learn for a young child. So he wanted to make a game that was a little more simplified, one that was more of a party game than a fighting game, so that anyone of any age could play and understand it. And in order to do so, he designed it like a platformer, one of the most popular and widely understood genres at the time. And he made it so up to 4 people could play at the same time. But Sakurai knew that having a completely new cast of characters wouldn't sell as well as a cast of familiar faces. So he decided to try and get Nintendo's permission to use their characters. But Nintendo is, as always, very protective about their franchises. And Sakurai knew that it would be a struggle to obtain the rights to the characters. So he needed to go to the top, to Nintendo's most famous game designer Shigeru Miyamoto. With him on Sakurai's side, Nintendo would have to be as well. So Sakurai held his breath and presented his idea to Miyamoto. And Miyamoto said, no. He knew that Sakurai could make a good game with those characters, but he didn't want to risk the images of these beloved characters being in a bad or controversial game. So Sakurai and Iwata came up with a plan. If Nintendo wouldn't give them the rights, they would take it. So Sakurai designed 4 characters from different Nintendo games and put them into Dragon King. This was Sakurai's last chance. If they couldn't convince Miyamoto using Nintendo's very own characters, they'd be forced to make a game that would most likely be lost to time as that one weird fighting game made by that guy who designed Kirby. So Iwata presented the game to Miyamoto, but this time the prototype with the characters seemed to get through to Miyamoto, and he saw the potential that this game had. So with Nintendo's permission, Sakurai and Iwata got right to work on making the game. But just because Nintendo allowed them to use some characters, didn't mean all of them would come easy. The Pokemon characters are also partly owned by the Pokemon Company, so getting the rights to the Pokemon would be a little more difficult. You'd have to convince President Ishihara from the Pokemon Company to allow him to use the characters. But Ishihara saw the potential dangers that this game might have on the Pokemon brand, so he was hesitant to give the rights to Sakurai. But with a little encouragement from the creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, the Pokemon Company eventually allowed for Pikachu and Jigglypuff to be added to the main roster, alongside many other Pokemon and Pokeballs. This was the first time that Sakurai had made a non-Kirby game, so everyone at Nintendo was waiting to see if he could make a good fighting game. But many people playtested the game during its development, and it became clear that the game was going to be great. So after many months of development, Super Smash Bros. Finally released in January of 1999 in Japan and later in North America in April. But upon the game's release, the media's reaction was mixed. But not for the reason you might think. Many people were worried about how violence would look between their favorite characters, especially Nintendo characters who are known for being family friendly. But the people who actually bought and played the game really enjoyed it. It became a classic party game and a favorite among N64 players, with many people growing up with the game alongside their siblings. It provided a fun, competitive multiplayer experience that anyone could enjoy, and in that way, the game succeeded in Sakurai's goal. Sure, it wasn't perfect, it's somewhat clunky to play and has many oversights, but all in all, it was a must-have for Nintendo fans at the time. It got good reviews, and many people bought the game to see how different gaming icons would fare in a battle. So Smash 64 would go on to be one of the best-selling games on the N64 with over 5 million copies sold. So it would only be a matter of time before Nintendo came back to Sakurai for a sequel. A sequel that would become one of the most infamous games of all time. In an interview from 1999, Sakurai said this about the future of the series. "If we do make a sequel, I'd like to aim for a more complete, polished game." Unfortunately for him, he would have to struggle to meet the high expectations he set for himself, and it nearly killed him. But I say unfortunately for him because the lack of development time certainly didn't harm everyone. But let's start over. What happened after the release of Smash 64? Well, due to the game's success, Nintendo approached Sakurai for a sequel very soon after. This time, it would release on their next console, codenamed the Dolphin. But Nintendo wanted to have a big launch for the system, so they gave Sakurai a deadline. The game must be finished in just 13 months. 13 months to make a fully developed and realized sequel. Sakurai was crushed. He and his team would be forced through long, grueling hours at the office. And throughout the development, Sakurai was put to his wits' end by the immense pressure. He spent days without sleeping. His life became an endless cycle of work. His life became Melee. At one point in time, the stress even landed Sakurai in the hospital. But even through this struggle that the team faced, they still managed to develop incredible new things. Adding 14 new characters, which more than doubled the roster, multiple new single-player modes, a ton of detailed trophies to unlock, and, maybe most importantly, quick movement and combo potential. However, the game was not polished to perfection as Sakurai hoped. The game is full of oversights, glitches, and unintentional mechanics. But what Sakurai didn't realize at the time is that that's what makes the game so fun. It's part of the reason why the game would become what it is today. If he spent more time polishing the game, it could have turned out much worse. Super Smash Bros. Melee was officially revealed at E3 2001.
Got a great answer. Take a look.
This got everyone excited and ready for the next big Nintendo crossover. But besides from convincing people that Ridley would be a playable character, the trailer showed what the game was meant to be. A sequel that improved upon the original, and by all means, it did. Despite the short development time, the team created a really great game, and this became even more apparent upon its release, because it became an international sensation. Tournaments spread up across the world. People were studying and practicing the game every day. Players discovered new ways to use their characters. Techniques like L canceling and wave dashing sped up gameplay, making for a competitive scene that would become infamous for its stupidly fast playstyle. And it only got faster over time. And while there were many reasons for this, and many reasons why the game slowed down, the gameplay attracted many new players over time to the game. Eventually, huge gaming tournaments like MLG and EVO hosted Melee at their events, and the top players were actually starting to play for money. And even though most of these amounts were pretty small, it still proved how dedicated the community was. It was obvious that this game was a success. Melee became the best-selling game on the GameCube, and received stellar reviews. In terms of both competitive and casual play, the game was a huge success. It seemed like everything was finally paying off for Sakurai. It seemed like he should finally be happy, but the pressure had gotten to him, and he snapped. This is not what Sakurai envisioned the game to be. It's supposed to be a fun family party game, not some competition. He saw what Melee was becoming, and for that, the community must suffer. At E3 2005, Satoru Iwata announced that Super Smash Bros. Would be coming to the Wii with online multiplayer. What he didn't mention was that Sakurai hadn't even started on the game, and he wasn't even aware that Iwata was gonna say this. Iwata then told Sakurai that if he didn't make the game, they would have just ported Melee to the Wii with online support. Sakurai, of course, chose to make a new game, but his next Smash game would be different. He wanted to make sure it was exactly what Smash was supposed to be. A party game, like he originally envisioned. A game meant for families to have fun together, not professional gamers. This way, all the competitive players from Melee will try to play the new game, until the competitive scene of Smash slowly dies off. So Sakurai and his team got right to work on the game that he imagined. The game would be immensely slowed down from Melee. It included mechanics like tripping, where characters randomly fall over, which made the game defensive in nature, and the game was given an even larger focus on the casual gamer and families. This only boosted the Wii's goal, to bring gaming to everyone. Grandparents, little kids, and everyone in between could have fun with the Wii. And that's certainly not a bad thing. This game had a lot of good things going for it. 15 new characters were added, a complete adventure mode fit with a story and cutscenes was added called the Subspace Emissary, and it was on the Wii, which would become one of the best-selling consoles of all time. But the harm came when the professional Smash players finally got their hands on the game. You see, a rift was created in the community, between those who stuck with Melee and those who chose Brawl. And for the first time, Melee was dying. Many former Melee players started playing Brawl instead. If Sakurai wanted to kill competitive Melee, it was working. But as people continued to play Brawl, they noticed the flaws of the game more and more. Slow gameplay and a broken meta, literally, and stupid mechanics like tripping, which caused the Smash scene as a whole to start dying. But even though many players stopped, there were also a ton of others who stayed in the community with a passion. Over time, people went back to Melee and started practicing again, and the Melee and Brawl scenes were able to coexist. Melee and Brawl players continued to practice and hold tournaments, with many players' skills rapidly improving. In fact, Smash players were becoming increasingly devoted to the game, with Melee starting to rise again in popularity. If Sakurai and Nintendo wanted to kill off competitive Smash for good, they would need to go to war. The year is 2013. Super Smash Bros. Melee is once again being held at EVO. But that spot wasn't just given to them. The game was only allowed into the tournament after the community raised $94,000 to charity. It was a hard-fought battle against the Skullgirls community to raise the most money, but after Smash won, it was clear that they earned their place. Everyone was getting ready, practicing their characters for what would be the largest tournament in Melee history. But right before the event, Nintendo shut down the broadcasting rights to EVO for Melee. Nintendo made its first move in the war. So the community decided to take it online, to social media. They spread their complaints about what Nintendo had done, and it worked. Headlines came out describing how Nintendo shut down a tournament that raised almost $100,000 for charity, and finally the pressure on the company was too intense, so they backed down. The community won, and they would get to play and broadcast the tournament. The community taught Nintendo a lesson, that they can't mess with them. So everyone lived happily ever after, and Nintendo would never interfere with the community again. Yeah, this was merely the first battle of the war, and Nintendo was preparing for an all-out invasion. Nintendo's war would have to wait though, as a new era of Smash was upon us. This time, on two different systems, the 3DS and Wii U. And so the games would be creatively named Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U. So Sakurai and his team started work again. But this game is a little weird compared to the other games in the franchise. And part of the reason for that is the lack of any substantial single-player content. Sure, you have things like Smash Tour and Smash Run, but Smash Tour was bad, and Smash Run was only on 3DS. This game didn't have an adventure mode like Brawl's Subspace Emissary, which is probably the biggest reason to go back to Brawl nowadays. And the reason for this was really stupid. Sakurai didn't want the story's cutscenes to be uploaded to YouTube. Yeah, people uploaded the cutscenes from Brawl onto YouTube, and Sakurai thought that people wouldn't play Brawl for some reason because of that? So no adventure mode for Smash 4. Well, if they weren't working on the single player modes, they must have been making a really intricate combat system, right? Well, kinda? They gave players the ability to customize the movesets of each character, but this feature wasn't even used that much. Another reason why this game is weird is that it was made for 2 consoles. There were a bunch of stages that were exclusive to each version of the game, and they weren't able to add ice climbers back into the game because the 3DS is too weak. But in terms of competitiveness, Smash 4 was looking up. Tripping was gone and the game was somewhat faster, and the hype from the community was intense. Could Smash 4 finally be the competitive game everyone hopes for? Well, the game came out in 2014, first on 3DS and then on the Wii U a little later. And although it received great reviews at launch, by today's standards, it's widely considered to be the Smash game that's just eh. I mean, it's still fun, but compared to Ultimate and even Brawl, there's not much going for it. And while many people did like it, and still do, most people still preferred the gameplay of Melee. And some preferred the gameplay of another game. A game I haven't mentioned yet because it's kept secret. A game Nintendo doesn't want you to know about. A game called Project M. Project M was a mod for Brawl that made it more similar to Melee. It made it faster, got rid of tripping, and made many alterations to make it more competitively viable. The game had a thriving community of dedicated players, and the game was constantly being worked on by its developers. However, in 2015, the mod was discontinued after concerns about Nintendo suing them. Nevertheless, the community still used the mod and hosted tournaments for the game, and even though the game was not allowed to be streamed at any major tournaments due to pressure from Nintendo, the community pressed on. And although this setback was rough for the Smash scene, there was still hope. You see, Nintendo had actually started sponsoring and partnering Smash tournaments, even for Melee, like Apex 2015, which ended up being one of the largest Smash tournaments of all time, and it included every Smash game up to that point. It seemed like maybe the community could finally get along with Nintendo. Little did they know, with the next iteration of Smash, Nintendo would go on the offensive once again. After many rumors for the so-called NX, Nintendo finally revealed their next console, the Nintendo Switch. And with its announcement, came another wave of speculation and hype for a new Smash game. And in 2018, the new game was finally announced, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And it seemed to be living up to that name. Every character in nearly every single stage was a part of it, alongside brand new characters that would gradually be revealed over time. And this time the hype was even stronger. Everyone was wondering what characters would be added to the next game. Some people made elaborate fake leaks for the game that convinced thousands of people, while everyone waited for each reveal to see which gaming character would finally end up in the series. And when the game finally released, it definitely was the ultimate Smash game. It has an absurd amount of characters, an adventure mode, many other single player modes, and an enjoyable party game base overall. And DLC was coming, which included more characters, ever more boosting the hype. Ultimate received immense praise and sales, eventually becoming the best-selling Smash game ever. It also basically set in stone what competitive Smash was always going to be: Melee and whatever the new game was, while 64, Smash 4, and Brawl scenes were much smaller. But Nintendo was still hosting tournaments. Things seemed to be going well for competitive Smash. But right then, something happened.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads. New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut.
There are fears that the coronavirus outbreak could become a pandemic.
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus emergency in the U.S. and around the world. The number of cases soaring just today.
In-person tournaments could no longer be held without spreading the virus, so people were forced to play online. For Ultimate players, they had to use the game's servers, which are notoriously terrible. And for Melee players, they had to use emulators, which can be hard to use and sometimes have servers that suck. But luckily, something came just in time for Melee's community. A mod for the game called Slippy. It added rollback netcode, which dramatically improved online play. And it made it very easy to connect and play with other people. Slippy was the saving grace for Melee at a time where everyone was locked away, and it also allowed for tournaments to be held once again, but using online play instead. So, the Big House, one of Smash's biggest tournament series, planned another event for both Melee and Ultimate. Of course, the tournament would be using Slippy for Melee, as it is by far the best option for online play. But right before the tournament could be held, the tournament organizers received a message from Nintendo. The tournament would be forced to close due to its use of Slippy, and this time, there was no coming back. Nintendo shut down the biggest online tournament at a time where you could get sick from going into one in person, and their reasoning? That Slippy requires illegal ROMs of Melee to be played, so they needed to protect their IP. This is a lie. It is perfectly legal to have a ROM on your computer and even to modify it. It's only illegal to distribute and download ROMs online. So what could Melee's community do? Nintendo wouldn't allow online play, and offline play was impossible. So they started a movement. Literally. #FreeMelee spread across the internet, with many videos and posts coming out in support of the Melee community. And how did Nintendo respond? Of course, silence. This was certainly a dark time for the community. But almost exactly 1 year later, a glimmer of hope had arisen once again. A series of tournaments actively endorsed by Nintendo, alongside one of the biggest esports orgs in Smash called Panda, and the series of tournaments would be called the Panda Cup. This could be the start of a huge, thriving Melee scene. Maybe the game will finally have prize pools like the other esports. Well, probably not, but it still could be really good for Smash, and the community was ecstatic. Many people were skeptical, but overall everyone was eager to see what Nintendo would do, so everyone prepared for the circuit, practicing Melee and Ultimate, to get ready for what could be the largest tournament ever if Nintendo plays their cards right. In November 2022, a month before the finale of the tournament, Nintendo did something once again. They shut down another tournament series that ran about the same time as the Panda Cup. This was strange. They claimed it was because the tournament didn't live up to the health and safety standards of Nintendo, even though there was nothing that would suggest that. This was seemingly an attack against the Panda Cup's rival, Nintendo choosing one over the other. But okay, fine, as long as the community had the Panda Cup, maybe it would work out. And right about that time, it came out that Panda's CEO was threatening tournaments into joining his cup. So quickly after some online backlash and some terrible responses from Panda and Nintendo, people started leaving the tournament, and even members of Panda started to leave the organization. The finale to the tournament never happened. A few weeks after what was supposed to be the finale, Masahiro Sakurai announced that he was semi-retired, and he would no longer be working on Smash. It's pretty naive to think he retired because of all the drama surrounding Smash. I don't think any of the cancelled tournaments had anything to do with him, and also many of the decisions made by Nintendo probably weren't linked to him at all. But following the aftermath of the Panda Cup, I think it's pretty clear that Nintendo isn't going to work with the Smash community anytime soon. And it's probably for the best. Most Smash players probably just want to be left alone by Nintendo. After all, they've done nothing but harm to the community. So what's next? The next Smash game won't have Sakurai, and the Smash community is going to be on their own. Maybe the war is over. Maybe Nintendo will stop interfering, but that's not likely. But I know that if the Smash community is anything, it's persistent and determined. So no matter what happens, one thing's for certain, Smash will survive. Thanks for watching, see you later.